Okay, so let's see if we can solve this problem, eh? So here's my story. I've always been interested in diet, but particularly from a physical performance point of view. At this time that this picture was taken, it was March 2013, I completed 2 ultramarathons of 85 kilometers, 2 of 56 kilometers, and this picture was taken in Mexico, my last ultramarathon. So I didn't do them all in one day, but I did about 1 a year. But that was my interest, that physical performance is what I was looking at. And I started reading about this concept of using fat for fuel. Because when you run 85 kilometers, you're pretty much on your feet, well for me, somewhere between 9 and 10 hours. So you need to have enough energy. It takes a fair few calories to be active for that long. And it turns out that the human body, the best athlete can store about 2,500 calories as sugar. But depending on which literature you read, we can store anywhere between 50,000 and 100,000 calories as fat. Even someone that's very slim. See the big difference there? So if you're burning up a lot of calories, you got to run for 10 hours. You've got a huge fat fuel tank compared to this tiny sugar fuel tank. And so I started researching this subject and I came across something called the ketogenic diet. Now you might have heard of the ketogenic diet, but pretty much the content ratio of the ketogenic diet is 75% fat, about 20% protein, give or take, and then very little carbohydrate, maybe 5%.
Like Atkins.
This is pretty much what Atkins talked about. Now, Atkins is a story in himself. I have a huge admiration for Atkins. He hit this at a very difficult time, but as I said, that's another subject for another night. I did have an advantage already because, well, maybe genetic, but for the past 10 or 15 years, I've been eating 30 to 40 of these puppies a week. 5 or 6 a day. Yeah? This was just because I was interested in nutrition. Thank God somebody had given me a book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. It sort of got me onto this whole thing about eat whole foods. I studied the nutritional fact of the eggs and I just thought, well, if I just always eat a lot of eggs, I'll be okay. So can you see, even though I wasn't doing probably maybe not a ketogenic diet, because I loved making my own bread, I was right into that. But when you eat 6 eggs a day, it's going to limit what else you can eat. There's a lot of fat, a lot of protein in there. So I started looking at this ketogenic diet and tried to up my fat intake. So this is pretty much what I would have for breakfast. And I'll do 3 eggs. See, I still had some bread under there. I was living in Europe at the time. So there's some of this big, heavy white rye bread. A lot of butter on there, of course. I hadn't quite got to the stage of cutting up bread yet. So this would be my typical breakfast. And then I was working in construction, so this would be my lunch. And you see there's always plenty of raw vegetables, there's some cheese in there. It's a lot of fat, yeah? I was trying to make a high-fat dish. So that sort of became the base of my diet. That's the finished product. So you got the chunks of fat, you got cream, which is 40% fat. It's a lot harder eating high fat than people think. Yeah. Because when you take carbohydrates out of the diet and you try to replace that with fat, you got to give it to it. Otherwise you'll be in a calorie deficit. I eat raw meat when I know exactly where it comes from. Honestly, I don't eat a lot of meat here in Thailand. I'll show you my diet these days, what I eat here. But I know exactly where this meat came from. So then I'll do that. It could be 3 eggs, my fat dish, and just a piece of rye bread with some fatty cheese. A piece of salmon and some other fish, my fat dish. As mentioned before, root vegetables aren't the best thing to eat. But the thing about it, if you eat vegetables raw, as far as I can work out, then it seems that you got a harder time absorbing the sugar in there. Okay, because it's bound up a lot in the fibre. So if you have a raw carrot every now and again, it's not going to be too bad. And this would be my dessert. Heavy cream with cherries, sugar. I haven't had berries here lately where I test my blood sugar, but I was sort of following, the general guidelines I could find about, and the information about the ketogenic diet. And if you have a few blueberries, a few cherries, a few strawberries, not like a whole bucket full, but a handful, they're apparently not too bad for your blood sugar. Okay? But it's a little bowl like this, so that's what I eat. That's sort of what I ate, and this is going back mid-2013 when I started this. But where I'm at today with this, I am beyond what you call fat phobia. For me personally, I've decided this is now a non-issue. Now I'm just purely into the benefits and how to do this. The fat you actually convert the best to energy is exactly what we're told not to eat. The animal fats, the dairy fats. But having said that, because what they are, they're what you call the saturated fats, but you can also find quite good saturated fats in the plant kingdom. Something like coconut oil and olive oil have some of the best fats. So where I really first tested this ketogenic diet, like running on fat, was about June 2013. I've probably been doing this for a couple of months. And I didn't have any testing equipment like I do these days. But as far as my performance went, I ran a half marathon in 1 hour 26 minutes. Now it's not great, but it's half decent. Yeah, and that's on no breakfast. That was a race with 20,000 people, and I think it brought me into the top 200. Yeah. So you can definitely perform athletically just on running on a high-fat diet. Now, at the time, I had bigger goals than that, and I was running about well over 100 kilometres a week total, or very close to 100 miles. I would do things like run for 3 hours dragging a tyre behind me. Now that takes a fair bit of energy. Yeah? And that would be before breakfast. So you just imagine that, running for 3 hours, dragging this goddamn heavy thing behind you, and just drinking water. Now your energy's got to come from somewhere. I also had a stint where I was staying in New York, and one of my training runs was run around Manhattan Island. It's about a marathon before breakfast. Again, you need to have some energy to do that. And if you're not running on carbohydrates and sugar, you have to be running on fat. So now we come to December 2013, so we're back to where we started at the VO2 max test that I had at Florida. What the main thing is, it's trying to really measure your ability to take in oxygen and use that oxygen. So what's the maximum amount you can take in, but also use it. And that's a measure of the athletic capacity your body has. As well as it measures your fat burning, as we talked about, and some other things, your maximum heart rate, this sort of thing. So really, they stretch your body to the max, It takes you about, from start to finish, is somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. They keep putting up the effort level, and the treadmill goes like this. And every few minutes it'll go up, and the speed goes up, so you go up, up, and it goes faster and faster and faster. And you're the one who has to call it quits. So there's no finishing line. Now, my number was 70. And I don't know if you can see, but for my age, I was 40, I just turned 40 at the time. The superior level if you're anywhere above 48. It's said that you're in the elite category if you're anywhere above 60. The other thing that you really close the eye on with these gadgets that attach to your chest is your heart. And this guy's name is Dr. Kevin Vincent, and that's actually his wife, Dr. Heather Vincent. They're in the room with me, watching me very closely, and there's a third person as well, and they are asking you constantly how you feel. And every minute, Kevin has to approve the test to continue. If there is any sort of question mark with your heart, they're going to stop the test. So it's okay, Kevin, yep, how you feeling the whole time. So you're working on as hard as you can with this mask on, you're breathing hard, and they're going, how hard are you working, you feeling okay, taking your blood pressure, and he's going, yep, okay, we'll go up again, you want to keep going, and you've got this thing going on, and you're just going as hard as you can. So after the test, Kevin pulls me aside and said, I want to show you something. He pulls out a chart, my chart, which looks a bit like the one you see on the screen, and he explains to me what it is. You see this one here, this is this, and this one, this is that. He said, now it's pretty normal to have some irregularities for anybody. That's very normal. He said, now what was unusual about yours was you did not have one irregularity. He'd never seen that before either. So they'd never seen somebody burn fat standing still. And they'd never seen somebody with, well, I think his exact words were something like, oh, it's got a perfect heart. No sign of any heart disease whatsoever.
That's despite following the diet that you have been on.
That's despite eating 30 to 40 puppies a week for the last 15 years. So there's a bit of your answer for cholesterol and heart disease. So how would you feel being compared to Olympic athletes in athletic capacity at the age of 40? How would you feel?
Great.
Feel pretty good, wouldn't you? What would you do with that? Knowing that you had this capacity as supposedly late in life, but the machines don't lie, what would you do with that? More of the same? Okay. So a few months later, I was probably in the best shape of my life. You know, I kept training well over 100 miles, and then I quit running. Seems logical. Top of your game, set all these fantastic goals, and then you quit. I was at that. Remember, I didn't get injured. I was probably the best I'd ever been. Because I worked out that exercising at that level is probably not that healthy. Now, if you follow my Facebook page, I wrote a piece. I've changed it a little bit for tonight, but just it says exercise is a vital component for a well-functioning body. So I'm not talking about quitting altogether. But what I am talking about is we need to understand the true effect it has and respect it. Now, because I was so deep into trying to work out how my body works, how diet works, this is the conclusion I came to. And again, to me, the numbers didn't lie. So I couldn't keep going. I'd be filled to. A little bit more about that later, but it's a discussion for another day. But we will get a bit more into exercise, I promise. So what I did for the rest of the year I pretty much walk daily. And then I strength train once a week for 15 minutes. That's it. I actually don't think I ran again the remainder of last year. I did go and do a half marathon because my brother enticed me into it, and I was a bit curious to what would happen. And I'm probably going to put that in my next talk because there's some interesting things happen, but I was a bit of a train wreck, obviously, not having run. But otherwise, this is pretty much what I did. It was walking and then weight training once a week. And I've always been learning the handstand, so I would do a little bit of that every day, but you know, for 10 to 15 minutes. So nothing compared to running 100 miles a week or 150 kilometers. And yet, my weight pretty much remained the same. I kept following the diet, pretty much ate just once a day. And that's another benefit. When you start to have fat as your main fuel, you can go a lot longer in between meals. So it became very normal for me just to have dinner. Okay, we'll come back to my story. Now I've shown you how to eat fat to burn fat, yeah? I've used myself as an example. I eat fat, it goes into my fat cells like a wallet, and then I spend it. But what about if you want to actually lose body fat? See, I never really had a really need to do that. So I was more interested in the performance side, as I said. So you still need energy out. It has to be more than energy in, right? It has to be. Otherwise, it's not going to work. But what happens on this diet? You say, well, how can I just go on the diet and lose weight? Yeah? I still actually need to create an energy deficit and start burning my fat stores. Well, what will happen is what? What do you think happens? If you think about what we talked about, does fat stimulate your insulin? No. So what happens? What happens to the doors? What happens to the outdoor?
It's hormones that regulate.
Yeah, insulin is the hormone. And when insulin is low, because you're not eating carbohydrates, what happens to the outdoor when insulin is low?
Stay shut. Stay shut.
No.
Open. Oh, that's what I meant.
50-50 chance of being right. It opens, right? Insulin is low, blood sugar is low, the outdoor can open and fat can be released back into your bloodstream. So when you're eating, right, mainly fat, no carbohydrates, your blood sugar starts to drop and your insulin starts to drop. And guess what? Outdoor just opens up. Sesame open up, right? Then your appetite will self-regulate. Now what I mean by that is when fat starts to flow out of your fat cells, you're not going to be as hungry. So this is where people, well, you can't just eat, no, you need to lose weight. Yes, you can. You try and sit down and eat when you're not hungry. You're not going to do it, are you? So you see how this just gets rid of all the crap that it's because we eat too much? I dare anybody to sit down and eat when they're not hungry. You don't do it. Nobody does. Now, the main obstacle to do this conversion, to run your body on fat, is your brain. And that's because your brain cannot use fat for fuel. Unless you take that fat you eat and you convert that in your liver to something called ketones. Now I've marked them both in yellow because I want you to think of ketones as just another form of fat. But it's a form of fat that's been changed in your liver so that your brain can use it. We call this process ketosis. So see where the name the ketogenic diet comes from? Because if you eat a ketogenic diet, you're in a state of ketosis and you're producing ketones. So now you just learned a lot of terminology tonight. Okay, now you know more about the ketogenic diet than probably 90% of the population. Any questions for that? That makes sense for you?
Yeah.
So I said, your brain can only run on sugar or ketones. Now you stop eating carbs, so there's no sugar, so now your brain has to get ketones. And if you cannot, or if you're not producing ketones out of the fat you eat, that's it, game over. Because your brain is not getting fed. It doesn't matter how much the rest of the body is utilising the fat you eat. If you don't feed this ketones, that's it, end of story. And you will not be able to sustain a high-fat diet. Because your brain is going to be screaming out for energy. And you're basically going to stop. So, and what I mean by stopping, I don't mean you're going to die, because we're going to get into that. Your body has ways of making glucose, but what I want to start talking about now, when you're starting ketosis, when you're trying to get your body into this state, it's a very crucial time. What I mean by crucial is just that you really got to pay attention to a few things. Because what you're trying to do, you're trying to shift from a major fuel source of carbohydrates to a major fuel source of fat. And that's a big shift for your body. And depending on where you are on that scale, where you start, it's going to be harder maybe for you than it is for me. But it's all possible. Understand? We just don't start at the same point. I said I was maybe already really up the scale. I can still tolerate some carbohydrates. But it was when I really got into this, I get a lot of my knowledge from cancer research, which is really up on this. I'm going to cover that slightly as well. But one of my favourite scientists, Thomas Seifert, he's a researcher, professor at Boston University, uses the ketogenic diet for cancer to advise on treating cancer. And he said, whenever you're shifting from a major fuel source of sugar to fat, you have to understand the power of the glucose molecule on the reward center in the brain. It is stronger than any drug out there. So this is what you're dealing with. Okay, I'm going to cover my own experience I did here. And I felt that, and this is somebody who's never eaten a lot of sugar, especially in the last almost 2 years now. So you imagine if I have that, imagine what somebody who has just a little bit more has. But if you understand it, you can deal with it. So that's why I say understanding is the most powerful tool in your toolbox for tackling this. Then at least you know what you're dealing with. So what's obstacle number one to get into ketosis? Well, it's not number one, just one of them. In my opinion, exercise. Now, I just want to be very specific about this because you've got to take this in context. Okay, we're talking about getting into ketosis. How does exercise affect that? Well, if exercise forces you into this zone that you need sugar for energy, well, you just turned off your fat burning, right? And what happens when you force yourself into that zone? Especially your brain's going to scream out for sugar. And as we showed, anybody, no matter who we are, the more we exercise, the more effort we put in, the more we increase our body's demand for sugar, especially when we're used to running on sugar. It's just going to want more of the energy it's used to. Everybody get this point? So when you're trying to get your body to use fat, we need to actually do bugger all. Because if you start exercising, put yourself into that zone, this is where the sugar will come from. Your liver stores. And it'll dump that into the bloodstream. And anybody know what that white arrow represents? Insulin. Great. I was trying to make a bit of colour coordination for this. I'm hoping it's working. Then your insulin goes up, and then what happens to you? What happens to the outdoor in your fat cells? It closes. Okay. Or it'll actually break muscle down into sugar, and you'll get your sugar that way. So can you see, if you're trying to lose weight, right, and we go exercising, and you see, I go around the running track here in town, and you see overweight people, and I know they're jogging because they're doing a good thing, but they're actually taking themselves so far away from fat burning, it's not even funny. It's criminal in my opinion. And because this is actually, when we talk about this specific thing, once your liver stores are empty and your body goes into this catabolic state, okay, breaking down your muscle tissue, your body's eating itself, is a stress response. This is what your body will do when it thinks it's in danger. It'll break down muscle tissue because sugar is still the fastest energy, and your body doesn't know that you're just running around the track. It might think you're being chased by a lion because we're still primal. Stress is stress to the body. That's it. And the responses within your body to that stress is to keep you alive and respond to the demand you put on it, and it'll do everything it has to. So this is why your body would break down muscle if it has to make sugar. But that is not the body weight we want to lose, is it? We just want to lose the fat. Yeah? And can you see how exercise really puts the biggest block you can almost put in front of yourself to do that? Just by how the body works with hormones? Any questions for this? Pretty clear? Okay, so it's all well and good talking about this, and it's in an anatomy book, and I said this is straight anatomy, and you can read about this on the internet and YouTube, but I've actually tested this again and again myself. I call it field testing. So I'm going to get to what this is exactly. I don't know if you can read this, but this was Tuesday the 3rd, so this is about 9 days ago. What I normally do in my routine now is I'll do a hike in the afternoon. I don't know if you know, up the mountain behind the Chiangmai Zoo, there's a hike that goes up to the little temple. Anyway, it's about a 20-minute hike. Then I'll practice my handstands. Some days I'll do a few push-ups. Then I'll hike back down. So what I do sometimes to test the reaction of activity on my body, this particular day I took my blood sugar just before the hike, and it was 93. And I also have a way of testing the level of ketones in my blood, and they have 5.3. I'm going to get to what those numbers mean in a minute. But when I came back down from the hike, it was 6:01. I tested my blood sugar again. It was 105, and my ketones had halved. So basically now there was more blood sugar in my bloodstream and less ketones, which meant what? My liver probably dumped blood sugar into my bloodstream, and my ketone production had gone down, which means my fat burning had gone down. You understand that? Then you can see I took the same testing 14 minutes later. And that's because I sometimes do these 2 hill sprints. It's about a 200-meter hill, and I'll walk down and I'll sprint back up, and it takes about 1 minute to do that sprint. So I did 2 of these sprints. So in those 14 minutes, I only worked hard for 2 minutes. But look what happened to my blood sugar. It jumped again, and my ketones went down again. see, that was pretty high effort. See what it did to... Again, this is numbers. This does not lie. This is what it is. Now, this is my interpretation. I still need to really know more if this interpretation is correct. But this is what's happening to my blood. And as if you remember the curve at the start with the arrows where your fat burning goes down but your sugar burning goes up with how much effort you're putting in, that's what's happening here. This is just a glimpse of my self-testing, but I do about 20 blood tests a day, 10 of blood sugar and 10 of ketones. I have been doing it for the last month. So, but you need a lot of, you need to prick your fingers a lot. But you need a lot of data to do a proper analysis. You know, doing this for one day is not enough. Now I understand that exercise, I can make my blood sugar rise just as quickly as if I wouldn't eat sugar by exercise. And I can turn down my fat burning just as quick with exercise. So can you see, I'm going to show you, you can do the same, you can test foods, which I'm going to get into, but if you're trying to test whether your blood sugar is reactive to a certain food and you exercise at the same time, can you see how the data can get skewed? Yeah? This makes me realise how hard it is to do proper science. I have to think of myself as like a science object. And I have to try and keep the same routine if I want accurate data. I'll tell you what I've been doing that day. I've been sitting on my butt. Right? No effort. And as you'll see in a minute, a ketone level of 5.3 is in the... My body is metabolizing fat like off the charts. Very good question. So the question was, you talked about ketones as sugar for the brain, and you know, is there a difference? And don't worry, I'm going to get right into ketones because if we had all night, you couldn't shut me up talking about ketones. But you see, I've got to cover all this first before we can actually understand what ketones are. Okay? Now, as I said, the whole exercise thing, there is some fat burning after effects. And this is why I say I need to do more research into this. I'm getting there. But for now, we're also talking about just the context of getting into ketosis. Because what is it you do when you have after effects of ketone, of exercise, and you're resting to recuperate? So, does it make sense there's some fat burning after effects maybe? Okay. But for now, this is more at an advanced stage. Next time, if you come to my next talk, I can probably talk about that, because that's the stage I'm getting to now. But if you try to do exercise while you're getting into ketosis, it's just going to be a stumbling block the way I see it.